In this nugget, we're going to demonstrate how simple it is to integrate Microsoft RDS apps and desktops in a network that leverages Horizon View. Let's begin. I've always been under the impression that it's better to be inclusive and to include others as opposed to being exclusive. In many environments, there are Microsoft remote desktop services that are currently set up. Now, the previous name for remote desktop services was called terminal services. And so, for example, we might have a server here, maybe it's server 2. That's a member server in the domain, and maybe this guy is running remote desktop services. And if we want to include some of those for our clients, for example, Bob, what we could do is, first of all, make sure we have those services set up on a Microsoft server. So we could be serving up either applications or remote desktops via RDS. And then in Horizon View Administrator, we can set up what's called a farm, which is a grouping of resources of RDS services. And then we can set up pools for either desktop virtualization from an RDS host or just specific applications from an RDS host. So initially, what I intended to do was I intended to have the RDS server on this AD-RDS host, who's doing a lot of work. He's our domain controller. He's got SQL Server running. I also have an iSCSI target that has lots of disk storage for the ESXi host to use. And I was just thinking, I was going to toss on RDS on top of that. But when I attempted to install RDS, it said, sorry, you can't install this on a domain controller. And then I thought to myself, okay, great, I'll go ahead and just tag it on here to the member server. However, one of the requirements for using RDS in a Horizon View environment is that we have to install the agent. So I thought, no problem, I'll just install the agent, very similar to how we installed an agent on a VM. But when I tried to install the agent, it said, hey, you can't install the agent on this box. It's currently running the connection server software. So apparently those are mutually exclusive. So I ended up spinning up yet another Windows 2012 server. I enabled RDS services on that server, and I installed the agent, the Horizon View agent, on that server. And during the install of that agent, it asked me which connection server do we want to report to, and I told server 2 it should report to CS-1 as its connection server. So the backend RDS services and the agent is currently installed on server 2. So with the Microsoft RDS server sitting there waiting for us, with the agent installed and during the installation it registered or talked to the connection server, now here in View Administrator, we're going to go down to Resources, and under Resources we're going to select Farms. Now by default this is going to be empty. So we're going to add our first entry here by clicking on Add, and let's call it OM-Farm, short for Old MacDonald Had a Farm. Well, this would be our farm. And down here for the farm settings, we're going to go ahead and use PC over IP. If there's a timeout, the default is disconnect the session, and we're also going to say we want to log off disconnected sessions. Let's go ahead and say after 5 minutes. And we'll click on Next. Now currently in the RDS host it shows server 2, and the reason that's there is because during the installation of the agent, it asked us to provide the fully qualified domain name or the IP address of the connection server. So with server 2 highlighted, we'll go ahead and click on Next. We have an overview page, and then we'll go ahead and click on Finish. And congratulations, we now have an OM farm with a single RDS host in it. Now, one of the cool things with RDS is that we can serve up individual applications. So next, on the inventory, let's expand the catalog section, and let's select application pools. And by default, we don't have any application pools, but we can create them very easily by clicking on Add. The first question asks us, which farm do you want to draw from? We only have one RDS farm, and that's the OM-farm for Old MacDonald. And then we can simply go down the list and click on the applications to create separate application pools for each of these apps. For example, do you want to deliver Calculator as an app to our clients? No problem. Or how about Paint? Or how about WordPad? That'll be enough as an example. So we'll put checks in those 3 boxes, and then we'll click on Next. We can rename them here if we want to, and then click on Finish. Now, by default, when we create these app pools, it automatically kicks us into the entitlement phase, so we don't forget to do that. Just like in a virtual desktop pool, we also need to set up entitlement for our application pools. So we'll click on Add, and we'll go after Groups Only. We'll put in Domain, press Enter, and then we'll select Domain Users from the list and click on OK. Fantastic. So now when we click on OK, the Domain Users group and the members in that group will be entitled to use these application pools. And we'll click on OK. So now if we were to go to Bob's computer and launch the Horizon View client, and select this connection server, you'll notice we now have 3 new apps in our own little pools. One for Calculator, one for Paint, and one for WordPad. And if we want to launch one of these, for example, Paint, we simply double-click on it, and that whisks us away with our own separate little window just for that application running from that RDS server. So there's Paint. If we want to run another application, no problem. We'll go ahead and double-click on Calculator, and now Calculator is running. So if we have an existing app that's available on an RDS server, we can deliver it right inside of the Horizon View environment. So let me leave those open just for a moment. And let's go back to View Administrator, and let's kick it up one more notch. And that is because we can create RDP pools for desktops. So if we want to create a new desktop pool, we'd go under Catalog, go to Desktop Pools. And so far, all of our pools have either been full clones or linked clones, all in the vSphere space. However, if we have an RDS server that's willing to share up a desktop, we can add that as a pool right here as well by clicking on Add, specifying that we want an RDS desktop pool. We'll click on Next. We'll give it a name. We'll call it RDS Pool. We'll click on Next. We have some nerd knobs that we can tweak regarding Flash. We'll click on Next. It's giving us a list of all the farms that we have set up. We have one farm with one RDS host at the moment. So we'll go ahead and select that and then click on Next. And we will entitle this as well right after we're done by checking that box, and we'll click on Finish. So we'll add the domain users group once again for entitlement. And there's domain users. We'll select it and click on OK. And we'll close that window. So here on Bob's computer, we're running a couple of apps courtesy of the RDS host. And let's bring up the VMware Horizon client once again. And we'll go back to the same connection server. And we'll notice that now we have this new pool called RDS Pool. If we double click on that, that's going to bring us up a virtualized desktop from Server 2, which is currently running Windows 2012 Server. And we can move and adjust that screen as well. So here we have an RDS pool that we're using. Here we have an app from that same RDS server. We've also got Paint cooking from that same RDS server. And if we wanted to, we could open up a virtualized desktop to one of our vSphere managed hosts as well. Now, when practicing and setting up for this demonstration, I initially came across this error right here when I tried to connect to a remote app. It said a user has requested a type of logon, e.g. interactive or network, that has not been granted, blah, 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 blah. So I Googled that, and what it recommended I do is use the group policy editor, which you can launch by simply running gpedit.msc. There's also other ways to navigate to the editor. And this is on the RDS host, which was Server 2, which is running the remote desktop services. And from there I went to Computer Configuration, Windows Settings, Security Settings, Local Policies, User Right Assignments, and regarding access this computer from the network, I simply made sure that everyone was allowed to. And another option that we could have used as well is with the Horizon client, we could have logged on as administrator for the domain. And then, when we clicked on the application pools, Server 2 would then see us coming in as someone who had the rights for that interactive or network access that it was complaining about earlier. In most large environments, it's very likely you have a Microsoft guru or two. So anytime you bump up against Microsoft and group policy or restrictions, if you have those resources available, those people, I would tap into that. However, in a lab environment, logging on as administrator would also resolve that problem. In this nugget, we've demonstrated that it's easy to integrate Microsoft's RDS app and desktop services in a network that leverages Horizon View. I have had a lot of fun in this nugget. I'm glad that you joined me for it. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.